That's really how we make change and how we save the world. It's not
Mm-hmm.
about healing individuals. It's about vibrating at our own frequency, and from that, it gives the opportunity for the person in your field to see that and match it.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a long time ago, my only job is to make sure I'm vibrating as high as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at like, well, okay, well, how do I do that? And it's my
Mm-hmm.
conscious consumerism
Mm-hmm.
and my daily practices.
Welcome to Mystics, Muses, and Sacred Sites. I'm Maya Lila DeVento, and today I'm talking with my friend and teacher, Justin Lovato. And
Hello.
he is an amazing breathwork facilitator and someone who is probably the clearest, strongest example of the divine masculine in embodiment that I've met so far. In talking with a lot of the men in my life, the boys in my life, they don't have really any examples of what it means to be in the divine masculine. And
Mm.
so I wanted to ask you about your
Yeah.
experience of that and what does the divine masculine mean to you?
Yeah. So it's actually a very basic definition for me. The definition of a divine masculine is the ability to stay unconditional in all moments, to
Right.
always have an open heart. So it's a very clean and cut, clear answer. And to just, yeah, to have the ability to keep one's heart open. And of course, that's challenging for a lot of men that are still working through past painful experiences, their trauma, lack of awareness, which doesn't allow us to stay open. So for me, it's a very basic answer, very clean answer to stay unconditional. To me, that's the definition of a divine masculine. And I'll kind of add a little bit more to that. The reason why that's so important because I feel the definition of a divine woman is I unconditionally trust, I surrender.
Mm,
And so they work hand in hand, and that's where that beautiful vortex can be created between the two.
mhm,
And so since men are healing and learning how to step into that space where they can stay fully open during all moments when it's intense, when it's hard, when it's tough, when it's not comfortable, that's when a woman can fully trust and lead into her partner.
mhm. And
Hmm.
so what do you think men need in order to stay connected to the
Open.
heart and then open? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's our practices. It's a big part of what I teach with my clients, specifically men, but also women too. What will give us the ability to stay open during all moments? And for me personally, it's my lifestyle, it's my daily practices. When I look at the times, I reflect every morning in meditation and prayer on the prior day. And I look at the times where my heart became contracted
Mm,
or where my heart became closed. And I really take a look at why that would happen. And it's always correlated with my practices, it's always correlated with my consistency in my inner work. And that kind of goes into all aspects. It's not just, me meditating and doing my breath work each morning. It's connecting with the universe. It's connecting, as I just mentioned, with the prior day on where
mm,
I closed. It's in my food. It's
mhm,
it's a lot of conscious consumerism,
mhm,
which plays a big role in my ability. Anytime that I kind of strafe from, say, high vibrational practices, is
mhm,
when I have more of a more of a chance to essentially close and become contracted during intense
mhm,
situations. Because I think the big goal is how can we stay in the seat of the observer in all moments and not
mhm,
become reactive and not
mhm,
contract and close. And that's always tested in moments that are uncomfortable, when we're working with people that are possibly in their ego.
mhm,
So for me, it's vital that I kind of really honor my practices. I consciously consume my food, my water, my music, my
mhm,
community, and
mhm.
that really gives me a wonderful ability to operate from love in all moments, to be at peace in all moments.
Yeah, I've been finding this exact thing in my own life, just getting clarity over the years of when I eat refined sugar or when I drink alcohol, even like really good wine, or when I drink coffee or like these
Mm,
certain foods, I close more often or I stay in
mhm.
these like cycles of fear or disconnection. And when I can really commit fully to like no refined sugar, no coffee and
Yeah.
alcohol and these things, and even like flour to some extent for me, I feel more connected to my
Yeah.
higher self and the divine. And when
Mm.
I'm connected, I don't have to close and protect because I'm not acting as like this individual, terrified, small
Yeah.
self that's like mortal and needs to
Yeah.
protect its vulnerable little tiny heart. It's
Hmm.
like if I can stay connected to the divine and all that is, then I'm like, why wouldn't I stay open? But
Yeah.
because I'm in essence, I'm like, I don't need defense because I'm everything. Like I'm love. Love is coming through me. There's nothing to protect. There's nothing to lose. But it's a completely different consciousness level.
That's exactly what it is. What we're really talking about, whenever we close, we're essentially falling from loving awareness back into the trance of the egoic mind.
Hmm.
And fear will do that. I think what happens is most of us are raised in unsafe environments
Hmm.
and which create wounds, trauma, right? So, and then if, and most people were never given the tools or have the awareness or the support to navigate past painful experiences from their childhood or as a young adult. And so a lot of that energy that should be felt, honored, and transmuted has never happened in most people's
Hmm.
lives. And so
Hmm.
that kind of builds and builds and builds, and that's what we call trauma.
Hmm.
And so trauma is stored, stuck energy in the body that wasn't properly alchemized in real time. And so a lot of people are walking around with this stored, stuck energy, AKA trauma, in their body, and these become wounds or triggers. And most of us are walking around with these triggers, and
Which
everything
create the
kind of fits it.
patterns
Yeah, yeah,
of
exactly.
protection and
Mhm.
defense. And yeah.
Reaction, yeah, all that kind of stuff. So awareness is a big part of this. Awareness is really big, and most people lack awareness. And the way we become aware of these patterns, of these triggers, these wounds, to actually start making changes, that we first have to practice presence.
Hmm.
And that's something a lot of people aren't aware of. Most people aren't present through either their past, the future, distracted, addicted, overstimulated. So most people don't have really any moments of presence to simply become more aware of how they're operating or how they need to heal so that they can best show up for people in the world.
Hmm.
And so that's a big part, is awareness. But presence equals awareness, and then awareness can equal behavioral change.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
the pattern. But yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, most of my clients, this is what they're honestly working through. Everything comes down to is, how can we reopen your heart? That's
Hmm.
literally every question. Like when they
Hmm.
come through and they're like, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling. It's like, all right, well, how can we open your heart? How are your practices? That's the next question. How have
Yeah.
you been doing with your practices? And they're like, oh, it's been 2 weeks. I'm like, well, there you
Yeah.
have it. It's every time. It's every time. It's like, oh, it's been 2 weeks. Like, well, how's your food? I've been doing this. I also had a few drinks the other day, and I'm like, well, there
Yeah.
you go. And
Yeah.
when you have the ability to really zoom out and see things as just energy, it becomes a lot easier to navigate and make proper decisions. And so that's what I really teach, and how I navigate is I zoom out and I see things as vibration and
Hmm.
frequency. And I chose a long time ago to only really deal in high vibration
Hmm.
and all on all aspects, whether it's my water, my food, my TV, my music, what am I consuming
Hmm.
in frequency? And I
Hmm.
realized if I play in love, if loving frequency is the one I play in,
Hmm.
I always have the ability to stay conscious, to stay aware, to stay in the observer seat and not react to chaos, not get provoked by a person's ego. And in fact, I have the ability to do the opposite. I can transmute and I can hold
Hmm.
space for that individual, whether it's a man or a woman.
Hmm.
And with that, I've been able to really build powerful relationships and also have a powerful relationship
Hmm.
with my partner, with my woman, and she can fall into her divinity, which is, I unconditionally trust, I surrender to you.
Which I want to have another
Mm,
call with like both of you or with her of that experience of like what does the divine feminine look like?
mm.
Because again, like we've all been through so much wounding that there are very few examples of people who are operating,
Yeah.
that I know personally that are operating consistently in
Hmm.
these spaces. And yeah, when you're talking about your ability, I feel like when you're in your high vibration and like grounded in that, you're like a field of coherence. And then you can bring other people into that field of coherence with you. And that's part of
Yes.
the healing process. They get to have an experience of like, oh, this is coherent, high vibe energy. That's what that feels like. And again, even if they go back and forth, it's like we entrain
Yeah.
each other, and that's where the healing comes into play. And so it is like
Yeah.
it's like a contagious thing. It's
Yes.
like, consciousness is contagious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's social. It's actually, there's a scientific term, I believe it's called social contagion. It can go
Hmm.
either way.
Hmm.
Yeah, and and Joe Dispenza talks about this, as we raise our frequency, our vibration, that wave comes off us and we can definitely influence our surroundings. And I know firsthand I have that ability. We all do, but I can see it in real time when I'm operating from my highest self that I can really shift people. I can shift my woman if she's dropped for
Hmm.
whatever reason. I could do it with my clients. I can do it with my friends and what have you. But that's really how we make change and how we save the world, so to speak.
Hmm.
It's not
Hmm.
about healing individuals. It's about vibrating at our own frequency. And from that, it gives the opportunity for the person in your field to see that and match it.
Hmm.
And that's the really sweet spot. So I learned a long time ago, my only job is to make sure I'm vibrating as high as possible.
Hmm.
And I look at like, well, okay, well, how do I do that? And it's my
Hmm.
conscious consumerism
Hmm.
and my daily practices, and it's the simple stuff too. It's the breathing and meditation. It's the grounding. It's the
Hmm.
sunbathing. It's the going
Hmm.
on the walks. It's
The clean food.
the clean food. Yeah, the clean
Yeah,
water and dancing. It's a lot more simple than we think. And I
I
think
know.
I think what most of it is awareness of that simplicity of tapping into that higher vibration. I think a
Hmm.
lot of times too, what really gets souls stuck is the identification with the mind.
Hmm.
So that's a big part of this too, right? So and we kind of went right past that. So that's kind of cool to touch on that too. It's not just, what will give us the ability to stay in love. Well, yeah, high vibrational stuff, our practices, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's very true. But also it's the awakening,
Hmm.
awakening to who we actually are, this
Hmm.
higher self, this higher mind, and no longer identifying with our past painful experiences, no longer identifying with our thoughts,
Hmm. Our coping
um, our
mechanisms, the
coping
things that
mechanisms.
used to keep us safe or
Yep,
feeling like we had things under control, that then
exactly.
start to keep us trapped
Yes,
and
exactly.
less alive. Like I find with
Hmm.
all of my addictions, which I've been releasing, and I had an awakening. Like I've had a series of, it's always a series of
Yeah,
awakenings, but I
yeah,
had
yeah.
a
It's
very
not linear.
powerful, heartbreaking open one in February. And I was my higher self, like with a thin
Mm,
connection to my ego. And I was like, okay. And then it kind of flipped back where, I'm
mm,
back into my mostly my ego. And I'm more strongly grounded in the higher self because I had this visceral
yeah.
experience. But and now I find that I'm having to do the work of consciously choosing to embody my higher self and to choose the high vibrational stuff and let go, like for good, let go of
Hmm.
all of the old coping mechanisms
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I engaged in that egoic protection state.
And that takes time, that path, it's like basically the trials and tribulations after the awakening, or in
Hmm.
some cases,
It's
the
the
baptism. Yeah,
reps
it's
in the gym. You got to build the
yeah,
muscles to actually,
yeah.
hold the
And,
weight.
and
Yeah.
and I think a big part of this is understanding that those trials and tribulations are actually wonderful opportunities. I really see them as opportunities. I see triggers as opportunities, to be
Hmm.
honest. Anytime I become contracted or triggered, I become curious.
Hmm.
Become really curious, like, oh, what is there for me to understand, learn, and expand and find love within that
Hmm.
space.
Hmm.
And so it really just comes down to that relationship in time. But, like you just said, awakening is not linear. We have these moments where we awaken,
Hmm.
and because we're still learning how to incorporate these practices, which is a very, very big component of the
Hmm.
ability to stay awake, right? Because that's
Hmm.
the next thing. It's
Hmm.
like, okay, I did plant medicine. I'm now aware that I am a soul in human carnation and I am everything and I am everyone. Okay, how do I remember this? How do I
Hmm.
actually remember this? Well,
Hmm.
integration is something that most people don't do.
Yeah.
Yeah, even a lot in the spiritual community. I see people
Hmm.
that go to do an ayahuasca ceremony every 3 months, but nothing's really changing for them.
Hmm.
And it's like,
Hmm.
well, you have to go home and you have to integrate and you have to make behavioral changes. If
Yeah.
you if you are doing these ceremonies, or if you have these awakenings but you go home and you don't change your diet, you
Hmm.
don't stop consuming certain music, you don't
Hmm.
stop, consuming certain things on TV or
Hmm.
people, or things like alcohol or porn, you'll fall right back asleep into your old self, your old identification, the ego self, the false self.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'll kind of play in that limbo, and then you'll get to this breaking point again.
Mm-hmm.
And all right, I'll go do another plant medicine, or okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to go do this. I'll go do a 10-day Vipassana and I'll
Yeah.
awaken again.
Yeah.
But then we don't make the changes. And
Yeah.
I swear, like, that's the biggest thing is you have to actually make the vibrational, the frequency changes in how you operate. And I go really deep into it. Like it's in my furniture. Everything's energy, everything is vibration. So I literally, when it comes to buying furniture, I don't buy things that come from China. I don't
Mm-hmm.
go to
Mm-hmm.
IKEA and pick up a bed frame. I don't do those things. I go on Etsy and I find like a local builder in
Amazing.
Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's love and energy going
Mm-hmm.
into that product. I mean, I just did it with my woman's coffee mug. She wanted the
Mm-hmm.
coffee mug. I could have easily went to any of these stores and bought a
Yeah.
coffee mug, the
Yeah.
same one that's been made 10,000 times. Beautiful mug.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful mug.
Handmade. I'm the same
Handmade.
way. I will
Nice.
spend $70 on a coffee mug, which I
Hell
know
yeah.
sounds insane, but like I know the woman who made this and I love
Yeah,
her art
same.
and I want to support her art.
Support it.
And like, this is definitely a different vibe than a Walmart
Mhm.
mug. Like you can
Yes,
feel it.
yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound insane once you see things as energy,
Yeah.
because
Mm.
everything's an energy exchange. And so, in fact, that mug carry that's what's beautiful about when you zoom out and you see things as frequency and vibration. That mug isn't that $70 is a wonderful energy exchange.
Mm.
There was mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
love, thoughtfulness, time, hands
Mm-hmm.
going into that product for specifically you. And she probably
Mm-hmm.
asked, "What color do you want it to be?
Mm-hmm.
What else do you want it to be?" So
Mm-hmm.
you're communicating. It's for you. It's
Mm-hmm.
made for you. It's specially for you. And that's a wonderful energy exchange. And that energy in that mug, when you drink it, it's not just a coffee cup that's
Mm-hmm.
made in some factory
Right.
with people that don't enjoy their work, that are maybe underpaid, that
Mm-hmm.
might even be slave labor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
now here's a and that's true feng shui. People talk
Mm-hmm.
about feng shui.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you have things that are custom made with love and mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
your house feels different
Yeah.
vibrationally.
And your
People,
life does.
your life is different.
Yeah.
And what's cool about this too, right, is we're really also talking about are the hermetic principles and the laws of the universe. And so when you operate in this space, your reality starts to honor that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really quite beautiful. I see it everywhere around me. Like I do that with my food. Like I just don't buy, a piece of steak. I make sure I work with a regenerative farm where there's
Mm-hmm.
mindfulness to the earth, the planet, the animals, what
Yeah.
have you. And because I honor that and I consistently honor that with all things, my reality, it's like I'm seeing regenerative raw cheese pop up in my grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And I don't see that anywhere else in most places. I see all these amazing things because I stick to my core values when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to consuming, that the universe is now delivering those things for me. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not just in items, it's in people,
Mm-hmm.
places,
Mm-hmm.
things, work, opportunity. And that's the law of attraction as well. So we're actually working with our mysticism, our magic, if you will, by honoring those things, by operating in that space.
Absolutely. And yeah,
Hmm.
I want to go back to you mentioned how when with this open-hearted connection that you have, it comes an ability, like a power. Like you have a power to influence and affect people.
Hmm.
And obviously, I feel like for some people that's kind of it goes into that trigger of like, oh, you have power over somebody, and there's that whole, toxic masculinity that's not connected to the heart, which we've
Hmm.
been living in is thousands of years of men in power that are not connected to the heart and have their
Hmm.
hearts closed and protected and are coming from wounding.
Hmm.
And so I was having this thought process the other day. I had a book that came in that I'm working on called Anger is a Lie, because the anger is based in that egoic protection and that like causing more separation with the angry force rather than, the truth
Love.
of love and connecting. And I feel like the opposite, like the healthy expression of anger is actually loving power, where you
Hmm.
have that open heart, that connection to your heart, and you're still in your power. And then you can bring that to the situations where you don't need anger, and anger is not the most effective tool if you have that higher
Hmm.
tool of loving power.
Yeah. The ability to, and Ram Dass talks about that, the ability to, understand that this space, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of things. And the ability to see that and keep your heart open is one of the biggest tests.
Mm-hmm.
And I think again, when we identify with our experiences or our pain or our suffering, that is where it becomes incredibly difficult. But I think when we truly awaken, fully awaken, which is what we may call enlightenment, having the ability to be in the world but not of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole different space to be operating from. It's absolutely freeing. You're not resisting, you're not fighting, you're not
Mm-hmm.
avoiding, you're not trying to fix. And that gives you the ability to be at peace with what is. You fully trust and you fully allow because you see differently. You're operating from a different place of knowingness,
Mm-hmm.
which everybody can get to. But if they identify with their mind, that very limited mind that has fear, that has judgment, that has
Mm-hmm.
these old wounds and old patterns, that's where people kind of get stuck, is that identification. That's the biggest one, is if you still identify with your thoughts, your past experiences, all that kind of stuff, that's kind of where you will meet the brick wall almost
Mm-hmm.
every single time. It's really understanding that who you are on a fundamental level, and honoring that space. And once you remember who you are, it's really about, okay, what do I do to remember?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
The
hmm
remembering is the tricky
The
part.
remembering, yeah, the remembering is the tricky part. First awakening and then remembering.
And I think the main difference is coming from wholeness and
Mm,
love versus the separation and the fear. And it's like
yes.
I can feel when I'm in wholeness versus when I shut down and my heart closes and then I'm separate and then I'm afraid and then I'm trying to manipulate the
Yeah,
external world to get what I think I need to survive.
yeah,
And like it's such a contrast because it feels so awful to be in that frightened, contracted space, but most of us live there like all
yeah.
the time.
And it takes
And
so much
yeah,
energy to be there too.
it does. It's exhausting. Yeah, it's so
It's the
exhausting.
most, that's the most part, that's the craziest part, is incredibly exhausting not going with the flow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, whenever we resist reality is when we find divisiveness within ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
Reality is reality. Our human thinking mind, our ego thinking mind creates the labels. There's actually no such thing as good or bad,
Hmm.
right? There's just something that's happening. And that's what makes a man really safe. And and that ability is when he sees chaos, he doesn't necessarily label it or judge it. Because as soon as we do that, we're
Hmm.
back in the egoic mind. We just see it for what it is. And we
Hmm.
actually have empathy,
Hmm.
understanding, compassion, and grace for those situations.
Hmm.
And we can operate from a place of love and understanding. And that's
Hmm.
something that Jesus did so well.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's what made Jesus so gangster, is that he was always able to stay open, his heart
Hmm.
fully open. And I mean, even in the worst of moments, he was
Hmm.
forgive them. They do not know what they do. He's like, he was able
Hmm.
to stay in love, which was the big lesson here. I mean, and then that's how I see it. It's like every time that I get met with trials and tribulations, there's
Hmm.
the test to stay open, and sometimes it can be difficult. Sometimes those tests can be really powerful. And, but with your practices and with your level of awareness, acceptance, reasoning,
Hmm.
love, all that kind of stuff, devotion, passion, it can be there. Your values will be there. That's another thing too, though, I think a lot of people don't have written down or even
Hmm.
know or even ever talked about are their core values.
Yes, yeah. And
Mhm.
that I'm actually doing a workshop with some friends soon about developing and remembering and creating your life purpose, mission, vision statement based on your
Mm.
values. Because we all have different values and
Yeah.
there's different flavors and they're beautiful. But my main values are joy, beauty, connection, and thriving. Like
Mm.
with thriving being the culmination of joy and beauty and connection. And I don't use the word love because I feel like it's been so,
Mm.
you know, kind of watered down or just desecrated in a lot of ways. And so for me, like joy, beauty, like that's love and connection,
Mm.
joy, beauty, connection,
Mm.
like that in essence is love.
Well,
Uh,
that's what's kind of cool, right? So, like, I learned a long time ago there are two types of values. So there's what I call means values and ends values.
okay.
And most people, when you ask them what their values are, most time they don't know, but they'll start listing off means values.
Okay.
And means values are, for example, I value family. I
Mm,
value getting together and eating and connecting and, playing and having fun and dancing. Well, okay,
Mhm.
that's a means to an end. And what's the end value? And that would be love.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it
Mhm.
falls under the umbrella of love. Or say
Mhm.
another example would be, oh yeah, I value traveling the world and hiking and climbing mountains, and I love driving a car with the top down with the wind in my hair. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, what you value is freedom.
Mhm.
And so what I did is that I created my ends values, and all the other stuff kind of falls underneath those umbrellas of these really powerful ends values. So I have 10 ends values, and
Okay.
my values are freedom, love, truth, balance, presence, awareness, passion, devotion, acceptance, and reasoning.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Amazing.
yeah, reasoning was the last one that was added for me, and that was probably one of the most important ones, to be honest, because for a while, a lot of times we have our values, but then if they're not being met, we can almost draw like a line in the sand.
Mhm.
And that's something that I was doing if someone didn't align with my values.
Mhm.
And so I realized like, oh, reasoning definitely has to be a part of that, and like for instance, I have my values when it comes to how I consume. And so I won't eat certain things or I
Mhm.
won't go to certain restaurants.
Mhm.
And a wonderful example, this happened this last year. I had a friend who had a birthday and he got a Dairy Queen cake. And I was like, "Ooh, I'm not going to eat that." You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to eat
Yeah.
that Dairy Queen cake at all. I'm aware of the business. I'm aware of what's in it. It's like,
Mhm.
it doesn't vibrate with me. But I leaned into my value of reasoning. And so
Mhm.
I went up to my friend whose birthday it was, and then I was really curious, not judgmental. I was really curious,
Mhm.
like, oh, well, I wonder what made him get a Dairy Queen cake, of all places to get cake. So I asked him, what made you get a Dairy Queen cake? Really fully curious. And he's like, well, he goes, my brother, I had a brother that passed away when we were
Mhm.
younger. And our birthday was like 2 or 3 days apart. And he's like, so our entire lives when we were younger, my parents would take us to Dairy Queen and we would get a cake and we would celebrate our birthdays together.
Mhm.
It's like, wow, that's love. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. So I was like, yes, I'll have a piece of cake. Yeah,
Uh,
and I'll enjoy it, and it was beautiful. So it was transmuted actually.
yeah.
That cake was transmuted because it's with love.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
amazing what you
Mhm.
can even do in that space. So reasoning was a wonderful value that I leaned into
Mhm.
in that situation, which brought me to love.
Okay. So how do you define reasoning as like following that curiosity and
Yeah,
like okay.
yeah. Without judgment, without evaluation.
Mhm.
Yeah, and reasoning can go kind of like into many things. Like I'll even use a situation where I failed, so to speak. And this is where I learned to have the value of reasoning. I used to have a particular view on certain medical procedures.
Mhm.
And I was dating somebody that had a different opposing view, and I drew
Mhm.
that line in the sand like, well, if
Mhm.
you feel that way, I can't be with you,
Mhm.
essentially. And it was also leading with fear because what if
Mhm.
this and what if
Mhm.
this
Mhm.
and if I had the value of reasoning, I could have became really curious as to why that individual had their point of view and be
Mhm.
interested in learning why they feel that way,
Mhm.
and then maybe even seeing if they would like to look into it together, and we can
Mhm.
research it together,
Mhm.
and then have a better understanding together, and reasoning would have done a wonderful thing there as opposed to like being shutting it down, drawing
Mhm.
that line in the
Mhm.
sand,
Mhm.
and not allowing an opportunity for curiosity, for growth,
Mhm.
for love and
Mhm.
understanding. And, this person was smart. I want to value their intelligence. I want to value
Mhm.
why they feel the way they feel. And I didn't do those things because I didn't
Mhm.
have that at that time.
You closed, yeah.
I was closed. Exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, curiosity is definitely one of my main values. And that's what I'm hearing is, and that's, I wanted to remark on that, you're very discerning and you make very strong, clear choices like about your consumption, but it's not attached to judgment. Because a lot of
Correct.
times in our society, people will
Mm,
judge something and then they'll be like, well, this is why I have these clear boundaries. It's almost like they need
yeah.
that othering and that pushing away to give them the
And
strength
that took
to,
practice. Yeah, I
yeah.
remember when I didn't have that awareness and I was going through this change and I was like, I almost needed them to do what
Hmm.
I was doing
Hmm. Hmm.
for me to follow through. And when they didn't, it mirrored me in
Hmm.
such a way where I still wasn't in my power and my
Hmm.
ego still wanted to do those things. It still wanted those things. And I still
Hmm.
identified as that space still. And so that was a big one that I learned a long time ago. And I think it's a process that we all kind of go through. It's like as we start to awaken, we're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to use plastic water bottles anymore. And then all of a sudden, like we've only been doing it for 3 days, and we're like looking at every person with a water bottle, and we're like,
Yeah.
oh, they're ruining the earth. That person's horrible.
They're
And
an
it's like,
asshole. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's like, well, you were doing that 3 days ago, So having some grace will be nice. But yeah, it's usually when we fall into judgment, it's still mirroring parts of ourselves.
Hmm.
And so I really, like I said, I really enjoy when my person becomes contracted or triggered, because I can be like, ooh, what is that within you that
Hmm.
we can kind of look at and open to?
Hmm.
Like, hey, let's see that.
And gain more freedom. Because the
Yes,
trigger is just
expansion.
a place where you're not free and you're being
Correct.
limited in some way from the expansion that feels good and that we want.
Hmm.
And yeah, the curiosity is a really beautiful way. And I've been doing that more often with things like one of the things that triggers me is when people refer to God as he. Like that
Mm,
triggers me. I was raised in the
mm,
Catholic Church and I don't believe God has a penis. And I believe if you refer to God as he, you're cutting yourself off of a full half of divinity.
mm,
And
mm,
so, but instead of like, getting angry about it, what I've started doing is just asking people, and this is on,
mm,
on Instagram, of like, I'm curious, and I am curious. I'm curious,
mhm,
like,
mhm,
why do you refer to God as a he? Like, do you experience the divine as a man? Or,
mm,
and a lot of people are like,
mm,
oh, it's just habit, or like, I don't even notice it, because it is
mhm,
deeply ingrained in our society currently.
mhm,
And I would like to help shift that to,
mm,
words are already problematic because they're defined by what they are not,
mhm,
and they're not the thing. And so they're separate and, it makes a big mess. And so
mm,
I also value truth and I'd like to get closer and closer. Like if we're going to use words, we're going to keep using words. So like, let's try
mm,
to get as close to the feeling of truth as possible. And so it's
yeah,
like, how can we talk about God, this
mhm,
insane, huge goddess, God, everything, all that
mhm.
isness, in a way that's like a little closer
Oneness.
than just saying
Yeah,
he. Yeah.
yeah,
Or even
yeah,
just saying God. Like I don't
yeah.
use that word much myself either
Yeah, a
because
lot of, yeah, even Eckhart Tolle talks about that word because it's been used in such a way and it creates a powerful trigger in most egos, That
Mhm.
was how it was for me for a long time. And I even with my family members, if I use that term
Mhm.
now, I could see them like have a visceral reaction, like a full trigger, because
Mhm.
of how they view or their relationship or that programming within them. And so, yeah, it's finding like neutral words or even just trying to, most people's definition is completely different. Like it's
Mhm.
good to establish like, well, what's your
Mhm.
definition of God? Most people, it depends on their background. They might think it's a bearded man in the sky, and other people, it's like it's everything. It's energy.
Mhm.
It's a frequency.
Mhm.
You know. Yeah, and so it's quite fascinating. So like words can be a little tricky. Understanding definitions it can be helpful, but I think what's beautiful about what we're talking about is the ability to have these type of conversations and not get caught up on words and allow things and be open and be understanding and allow different perspectives, different ideas with openness and I mean understanding and allowing
Mhm.
it to be
Mhm.
there. Yeah, without the contraction, without needing them to be a particular way for me to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big one, not needing things to be said right. And I was like, oh, okay. And that took practice too.
Mhm.
Yeah, because there are part of me like that would want to almost need them to see it my way, validate my ego
Mhm.
for me to feel okay. And then that was a work in progress. And then eventually, I would have conversation without trying to get them to see my way. I can just share to share. They could just share to share.
Mhm.
And then I got to a point where I didn't even need to share. I could just listen.
Mhm.
And that was really great too. It's like, I don't need to talk about what I think or what I feel or any of those things. I can let this person just share their thoughts and feelings, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Hmm.
So how did you like where you are now? Did you have like an awakening? Did you have
Mm.
something, an event in your life? Like what triggered
Yeah.
you becoming you?
It's been a long road. I got into, you know, I guess I can give some background of how I actually operate and how I've always operated. As a young child into my, youth and into my adulthood, I've always operated with myopic presence. So I never really lived in the past or the future even
Mm.
before I awakened.
Okay.
So I was myopically present to a fault possibly. So I
Mm.
was so present that I could even lack awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So more like
Mm-hmm.
a dog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I'm not paying attention, if I'm going after a ball, I might get hit by a car type of shit.
Uh-huh.
That's like I was so present in whatever it was I was doing, and it really served well because I didn't also have any fear. So I had no fear
Okay,
as a
wait,
kid.
wait, wait. So you had no fear of anything? You were just a
None.
fearless?
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have to do a whole thing about this because I'm fascinated. I've heard of one other woman who had a brain injury and
Mm,
she lost all fear. And I'm
mm.
fascinated by this topic because most of us think we need fear to function, and I
Yeah.
I
So
think that
I
we
can touch
don't.
on that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Okay.
So there's two different types of fear. So
Mm-hmm.
there's your primordial fear,
Mm-hmm.
which I definitely had. Like I would get
Mm-hmm.
out of the way of the car, and
Yes.
if I had to protect myself, I could fight.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's primordial fear. That's your innate person
Mm-hmm.
and its DNA to
Mm-hmm.
survive. So I definitely had that, but I didn't have egoic fear.
Okay. All right.
That's the difference. I
Yeah.
didn't have egoic fear.
So
It
you
was
weren't afraid of what people thought of you,
no,
judgments,
none,
of failing. Okay.
none. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It never even went through my mind.
Hmm.
And which was really fascinating because my childhood, my stepdad was incredibly abusive, and usually that's where the programming begins,
Mm-hmm.
being in unsafe environments.
Mm-hmm.
So for whatever reason, and I think it's because I lived in such myopic presence, even when I was getting abused by my stepdad, I was able to see him in a different light.
Hmm.
Usually, this is what happens with kids. We usually don't understand why our parents are treating us a certain way. And so we create a story of, I must not be good enough, of parents' love.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the programming comes in. So I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, what have you. And I remember as a kid, I remember seeing my dad and seeing that he was suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw that it had nothing to do with me.
Mm.
And I
Wow.
for whatever and I wasn't aware that I was doing this. I wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
I was aware, it was just what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had empathy for my stepdad. I had empathy, even though he was doing these things. I never created a program or condition or story
Mm-hmm.
about me.
Hmm.
And
That's amazing.
I know. It's really fascinating. So I went through my entire life up until 29 years old like that.
Okay.
Like literally, I can move anywhere, I can do anything, I can try anything,
Uh-huh.
no fear.
Okay.
And it allowed me to excel actually.
Uh-huh.
I can it was so funny. Like I lacked such awareness. It's funny looking back because I remember like I literally would just do anything. I would just do anything when it came to getting a job, doing work, asking a
Mm-hmm.
girl out, doing absolutely anything. I just had no fear. And I remember when I first moved to LA in 2008, I didn't watch. I also don't consume, and I think that's a big part too. I'm not a big consumer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't watch TV. I don't really buy things, and so
Did you
that's how I
feel
was.
did you feel like a sense of wholeness and completion within yourself in general?
No, I didn't have the
No.
awareness of that either. Yeah, it was
Okay.
it was honestly, I'm not joking. It's a lot of times like just a present animal.
Okay. A golden
Like and
retriever, just
yeah, just
present.
happy. Yeah, like how dogs, I mean, they're happy and they're
Yeah,
good to
they're
go.
fine.
And if they're yeah, and it takes a lot to really program a dog. It has to really
Yeah.
be in a horrible place
Yeah.
to really become, kind of traumatized because most
Mm-hmm.
animals don't become traumatized. You have to really
Mm-hmm.
program them to do
Mm-hmm.
that because they live in such myopic presence.
Mm.
That's what makes animals so amazing is that they don't have self-awareness to create a story.
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
really have to program the brain of a dog for them to be reactive or scared or timid. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
they're not living in fear. They're just more so reacting because they're
Mm-hmm.
programmed that way. So there's a bit difference.
Yeah.
And so because I lacked such awareness, but lived in myopic presence, I shook it off. I
Okay.
shook
Yeah.
everything off like an animal would, so to
Yeah.
speak. So when I was 29, I did mushrooms for the first time,
Okay.
and I went and watched the sunset and nothing, I didn't become aware at that time either, but randomly, when looking back now, I randomly started eating differently. I
Uh-huh.
started picking up trash everywhere I saw it. I started getting away from plastic. And now I didn't do any research on this. This wasn't coming up in my feed.
Yeah.
Instagram just came out. It wasn't like I was consuming any of this. It was just a natural innate
Yeah.
feeling that
Yeah.
was happening within me. Again, because of my lack of awareness, I wasn't reading at this time. So I was doing these things just naturally. And so what I learned is like when you are existing in such presence, consciousness can stream through you without the distortions. And what I
Mhm.
mean by what causes distortions is the fear of the mind and the body. And
Mhm.
so, because I didn't have any fear of the mind, therefore I didn't take on any fear within my body, I had minimal distortion. So, when consciousness would just move through me,
Mhm.
I intuitively just went with it, and it was always amazing
Mhm. Mhm.
in all moments. And so, I would just listen to that. And so that's how again I operated for so long, and I started making these unique changes, more aligned as I moved through. And then at 33, I same guy who gave me the mushrooms is a client of mine when I was training people at Gold's Gym Venice.
Mhm.
Same guy comes up to me, he's like, "Hey man, have you ever tried DMT?" And then I was like, "Never heard of it," because I never researched anything. And he's never heard. He's like, "I'm gonna bring you some tomorrow, and you should totally do this. It's like mushrooms, but 10 times faster, and you really like blast off." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. I'll check it out." So I take it home and I put it in my volcano, and I smoke DMT on my couch.
Uh-huh.
Just smoke DMT, and it was a really beautiful, beautiful space that happened. So immediately I become nothing. I didn't know what that was at the time, but I became nothing. But I was aware of that I was no longer in my. I had a body,
Mhm.
and I believe I fell into the soul self seat. I didn't go into oneness. It was just soul seat.
Mhm.
And so I was in the higher realm in that space. So no longer am I human thinking body and mind at all. But that felt very familiar for me, actually,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
immediately there was a female entity that greeted me. And this is the first time I really like had a entity experience. And I didn't really have a thought on it, just like most things at
Mhm.
that time. I didn't have a thought on it. There was no really reaction. Till this day, I'm so curious about it because it's still how I navigate with supernatural things and mysticism.
Mhm.
But she acknowledges me, I acknowledge her, and I feel her love, and then she decides to fill me up with all this love. And it was amazing, but then she pauses and she looks at me, and she's like, "Do you know this love?" And I remember going, "Yeah, for sure. I know this love." And she's like, "Okay." And she fills me up more and fills me up more. And I burst into nothingness again and somehow come back to the soul self. And she's like, "Do you know that love?" And I go, "Yeah, I do." And she's like, "Wow." And I remember being so like happy and loving and proud that I really loved who I was. And I loved how I
Mhm.
navigated my experience so far
Mhm.
and how I operated and how I showed up in the world. I really loved who I was,
Mhm.
who my person was. And she goes, "That is amazing." She's like, "But I want you to know that most individuals walking around right now have no idea what that feels like." And that blew my mind.
Wow.
I had no idea. That's how
Mhm.
myopic I was. I had no
Mhm.
idea people were suffering, were present. I thought
Mhm.
everybody was just going through life like do 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 do
Yeah.
like hunky dory, like
Yeah.
everything's fucking great. And I did not have that awareness. So she gave me awareness,
Huh.
which also became very challenging for the first time because I became aware of the suffering, of the
Mm.
pain that everybody was going through.
Now,
And I
could you
was like,
feel it, or did you just were like, oh, these now I see these people are suffering?
so I didn't, I was such in my, and that's what's beautiful about where I'm at now is I'm now back into that space. When she made me aware, that's when things became challenging
Mm. Mm-hmm.
because she brought the suffering into my awareness. Before I was just this radiant light, and I did affect people. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody that I came in contact with, strong, huge men, bodybuilders, athletes, they would always say, like, "Man, I just feel really safe around you."
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't understand why. And everybody, and it actually allowed me to have a great career with training and clients. People were coming to me because they felt safe in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
All my clients were people that were terrified to come into the gym, and they're like, "I want to train with that guy. He's
Yeah.
safe. He's safe." And
Yeah.
I didn't know why at the time.
Yeah.
But once I became aware that everybody suffered, then I became aware of my behaviors that were also maybe contributing to suffering. And I
Mm-hmm.
became really aware of that. And so that's when I really started paying attention to how I consumed around age
Mm-hmm.
33.
Okay.
Now, still at this time, I never looked into any of this. I
Mm-hmm.
never looked up DMT. I never looked up mushrooms at this time. I never talked to anybody about it. I didn't think about who that entity was. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
become curious. It was really strange.
Mm-hmm.
And then I continued to smoke DMT whenever I would feel conflicted. Like all of a sudden, I felt like a calling to it. if I wanted to see things through a different lens naturally,
Mm,
but again, there wasn't much awareness around it. It was an intuitiveness.
mm,
So every now and then I would smoke DMT. It would shift my perspective on something. I would expand and I would grow a little bit more and learn a bit more. And then and so I was having these awakenings, but I never called it that. I was
mm-hmm,
meditating. I never called it that. I was even doing a little bit of breath work, never called it that, never
mm-hmm,
talked about it on my social media at all. I was doing these things. And then at 37, I became fully enlightened, I would say, around
mm-hmm,
age 37. And
mm-hmm,
so I randomly woke up one morning and I actually really did breath work for the very first time. Again, never looked up breath work, never fucking heard of it. And I just laid on my floor one day and I started breathing. And then I randomly exhaled and held my breath and inhaled and I continued and I transcended like I just smoked DMT. And this is where the transcendental breath work was created
mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm.
this space.
Okay.
And so all of a sudden I transcended. Nothing really happened too much in that time. It was just like, wow, I'm where I am when I smoke DMT. I was like, wow,
Mm,
this is amazing. I didn't know I
mm-hmm,
could do that without, the medicine.
mm-hmm,
I then randomly get up. I go into my office that I never went into, and there was these books that I've never read. And I go up to the bookshelf randomly, and I pull out a book, and it's Joe Dispenza, Becoming Supernatural.
mm-hmm.
Never purchased the book. Don't know where it came from. I never. Believe me.
Wait, is
I
this
had a.
in your house? This is in your
This is my
home?
house.
And
This is my
you
house.
don't know, you've never seen this book.
My partner at the time must have gotten it.
Okay,
Yeah, I've
gotcha.
never. These were none of these were my books.
Okay,
I,
okay.
I literally had a story in my mind that I was horrible at reading. Reading
Uh-huh.
comprehension wasn't for me. I dropped out of high school around 16 years old.
Okay, amazing.
So yeah, so I didn't read, I didn't consume, and I really literally mean that. It's really
Uh-huh.
wild. I didn't consume, I didn't buy
I love that.
things.
See, I've done all the consuming for you. I have read everything and consumed so much in the last
That's
44
funny.
years. It's insane.
I used to even have a joke. I was like, wait till I start reading. I used to say that to my friends. I'm like, I don't even read. Wait till I start reading.
Yeah.
So I pulled this book out, and for the first time, I was able to essentially focus. I was told I was really bad at reading comprehension. What I didn't have was focus. I didn't have any
Ah,
focus. And
yeah.
so the meditation I just did gave me hyper focus. And I pull
Mm-hmm.
up this book, and literally the first chapter was correlated with the meditation. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, this is wild. It was really supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Mm-hmm.
next morning, I do it again and I read a chapter. I do it again and read a chapter. And then about a few weeks later, I randomly, oh, okay, so there's a little sidebar. So this was also during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So that was also a big shift for a lot of people. And I fell into judgment for the first time in my life because
Mm-hmm.
I also didn't judge people growing up,
Mm-hmm.
right? I was in my own world. I was too busy fucking having fun to judge.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really judge. But when COVID happened, I found myself getting judgmental with people for the first time. I really saw the people that were suffering, mostly the children. I was really upset that children were being forced to wear
Mm-hmm.
masks for 8 to 10
Mm-hmm.
hours a day in school. That made me so upset inside.
Yeah,
And
me
so
too.
when I saw adults contributing to this without thinking, without asking questions, I fell into judgment for the very
Yeah.
first time in my life, and it made me rotten.
Mm,
It made me rotten. I've never been there before. I was
mm,
suffering, and then randomly, I don't know what it was. It wasn't even like a thing or a big thing. I just was, it was like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden this thought came in, and I was like, oh my goodness, I see it now. And my partner, and she goes, what? And I'm like, I think I believe in God because I didn't believe in God. Even all these supernatural things that were happening to
yeah.
me for the last fucking 10 years, I was like, and she was like, what? Because at that time I was like, no, like I don't believe in any type of God or anything
Yeah.
like that or creator. And she's like, why all of a sudden? I was like, I just realized that we are connected, that we are all one. And if I'm judging this individual, I'm judging God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she's
Yep.
like, wow. And I'm like, yeah. And just like that, the
Mm,
judgment left. And it took a little bit of time for my brain to stop doing it, but I was
mm-hmm.
aware that I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't my brain at that time. So
Yeah.
every time my brain would do it, I'd correct it. I'd be like, no, 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 we're not doing that. And I would send the
Mm.
person love. So I started alchemizing without
Uh-huh.
realizing it
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
at that time. And then that really kind of grew into where I'm at now.
Amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, I can talk to you for 5 hours. We definitely need to have some follow-ups because I
Yeah,
didn't,
yeah, yeah.
I now know more about you than I did, and now I have
Mm.
more questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we didn't, yeah, there's a lot more I want to talk about how do men embody the divine masculine, what can they start shifting in their life to, move the needle towards their highest expression and embodiment. And yeah, I want to talk more about fear and enlightenment and all of these things. So
Yeah. Maybe we can resume another time.
yeah, yeah, because my daughter's home from school first or pretty soon.
Perfect. I actually have a call at 5 too, so it's
Okay,
perfect.
perfect. Well, and I just want to say I met you through a mutual friend through your group Nirvana Nation, which is a breathwork collective, and you
Hmm.
guys, and it's like
Like-minded
fitness and
individuals. Yeah.
like-minded individuals, and just like, yeah, having that coherence of like other people who are on the path who are
Yeah.
trying to extract ourselves and our consciousness from the default
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, which we all
Mm-hmm.
know is being, done what it's
Mm-hmm.
being done to. So
Yeah.
and I've gotten so much personal healing, especially inner child stuff, through your breath works. And you are
Thank you.
like a very safe, strong masculine presence. And I so appreciate that.
Thank
And
you.
so, yeah, just a little plug for Nirvana Nation if people want to
Mm.
join Nirvana Nation. And then, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll have some more follow-up conversations because I love
Yeah,
this
we'll have
shit.
fun. We'll
Okay.
continue it for
Okay,
sure. Well, have a
awesome.
great day.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right.
Justin. Bye.
See ya. Bye bye.